Hi friends, welcome back to my kitchen. So this weekend I have a bunch of canning projects planned. Today I'll be making the ball recipe for candied jalapenos and the ball recipe for fire roasted peach and tomato salsa. Both of these recipes I've made before and I absolutely love them, so I'm very excited to stock up my shelves with some more of these great canning goodies. And then tomorrow I'm going to be tackling the Bernardin vegetable stock recipe on my pressure canner for the first time. So I'm both nervous and a little scared to get into that recipe, but let's get started for today. So I went to the farmer's market yesterday to buy some of the ingredients that I need for my canning projects this weekend, and one of those things are jalapenos. So I wasn't able to grow enough jalapenos in my garden this year to actually have enough to do any canning projects with. We've just kind of been eating them fresh, and I actually used some in the last canning project that I made of the fire roasted and peach salsa, but it only required 2 jalapenos, so that was easy enough to grab from the garden. But for this recipe that I'll be doubling today, I needed 8 pounds of jalapenos, which I don't know if you can see, that's a lot of jalapenos. I probably would have had to have quite a number of plants to be able to grow this many myself, but they're quite beautiful jalapenos. Look at that. I got a couple red, a couple green, just to make the jars look a little nice, a little contrast within the jars. So one of the first things I need to do right now is get these washed and get them sliced up to start with the candied jalapeno recipe. I don't think I'm going to be able to fit all of my jalapenos, all 8 pounds, into my large pot. So I'm going to do the recipe twice, essentially. So this is about 4 pounds of jalapenos, just in case you need a visual of what that looks like. I don't know, I would say maybe this is roughly 30 jalapenos, give or take, depending on the size. And I'm just going to give these a rinse and then start chopping them. So now that I have all my jalapenos cut, I prepped the rest of the ingredients that we need for this recipe. So I have 6 cloves of garlic here that are sliced. I also used the mandolin to slice these. 4 cups of sugar, 3 cups of apple cider vinegar, half a teaspoon of ground cayenne pepper, 2 teaspoons of turmeric, 2 teaspoons of mustard seeds, and 2 teaspoons of salt. I'll include a link of the recipe in the description below if you also want to make this recipe. So while I was cutting the jalapenos, I got my water bath canner going as well. I have it on high right now and it is just starting to simmer. So by the time I am done getting my jalapenos ready, it should be ready to can my jars. Next, you want to grab a large pot and you're going to combine all of your ingredients except for the jalapenos, and we're going to get this boiling until all of the sugar dissolves. So I have my 3 cups of apple cider vinegar, six cloves of garlic that have been sliced. Make sure we get all of that. 4 cups of sugar, 2 teaspoons of mustard seed, 2 teaspoons of turmeric, 2 teaspoons of salt, and half a teaspoon of cayenne pepper. So I just added in the jalapenos, and now you want to turn down the temperature to medium and let it simmer for about 15 minutes. You'll know it's ready when the jalapenos turn a little bit dark. They'll turn dark in color. And if you do have a pot that's bigger than this one, I definitely recommend using it. This is a little bit hard to stir all of these jalapenos in this small pot. I think I'm gonna have to invest in a larger pot to make these, especially because we usually like to double the recipe, which unfortunately means that I just make the recipe 2 times. This is what your jalapenos should look like after 15 minutes simmering. So they've definitely changed color. They're a lot softer. They've released some of their juices and it smells pretty incredible. So I'm gonna start to get these jarred up now. When I'm canning, I usually prep the correct number or the number of jars that the recipe says that it makes. So in this case, it says it'll make 4 jars, but I usually leave 1 jar in the canner that still has water in it, just so that it takes up the volume of the canner, just in case I don't have enough actual product to put in the jars. I still can take up the volume of the canner so that to make sure that I have the correct amount of water over top of the jars.
If you have never tried candied jalapenos, I cannot recommend them enough. They are sweet, salty, spicy, basically everything that you would want in a condiment. We put them on pizzas, on tacos, and they are so good on crackers with a little bit of cream cheese. This recipe is also very beginner friendly, so if you are new to canning, this is definitely a recipe to try.
I'll basically fill these up with enough jalapenos to start, and then I'll fill the rest up with the liquid. I actually might have enough for maybe 5 jars. So I'm gonna just throw 1 more jar into the canner to get it warm. Okay, so now that I've gotten all the big pieces of jalapeno out, I'm just going to fill everything up to about with half an inch of headspace left. Now you just want to use your non-metal utensil to get as many of the air bubbles out as you can, and then you want to adjust the headspace again to make sure that you have half an inch of headspace at the top of all of your jars. Just going to add a little bit more to each of these just to get them up. Maybe a little bit more on this one. Then you want to take a paper towel and just clean the edges of all of your jars to make sure that the lids are able to make a nice seal and there's no debris on them. And do the same thing to my lids. So I just wash these with soapy water. You no longer have to boil them or warm them separately. You can just wash them with warm soapy water and you should be okay. And then same thing with the rings. Just wash them with soapy water. And then when you're putting them on, just finger tight. I actually saw someone post the other day of what their lids looked like when they didn't do finger tight. They did it too tight and all of their lids actually warped in the canner because the pressure. So they ended up with lids that were all warped. Okay, so these are all good. I'm gonna put them back in the canner. All of my jars are now in the canner. You want to make sure that you have about 1 inch of water above all of your pint jars. And then these need to be processed for about 15 minutes. And your 15 minutes doesn't start until the water is rolling. It needs to be completely boiling before your timing starts. And then something I learned recently too with canning, if you live somewhere that has hard water like I do and you get that like calcium buildup on the outside of your jars, you can add a little bit of white vinegar to the water and that will prevent that from happening, so then you don't have this like white crusty stuff on the outside of your jars. So I'm gonna let this sit here until it gets to a rolling boil and then count my 15 minutes. All right, so these are done boiling. They boiled for 15 minutes and then I turned the stove off, took the lid off and let them sit for another 5. And now I'm going to very carefully take them out of the canner. And since I have another batch I'm gonna make, I'm gonna put the canner back on the stove, turn it back on. And I'm gonna go make this second batch real quick, and then I'll come back and then we'll make the roasted peach and tomato salsa together again. I just posted a video on how I made this salsa the first time, so I can add a link here if you wanna watch a more detailed video of how I did this. For this recipe today, I've actually doubled it because we only ended up with 3 jars last time and we ended up finishing them in like a week. So we wanted at least 6 jars this time, so I doubled the recipe. So I have 12 peaches that have been halved and roasted. I have 12 tomatoes that have been halved and roasted, 2 medium-sized red onions, and 2 red or yellow peppers. You can use whichever one that you'd like. So now that I have all of this here ready and roasted, I'm gonna chop everything up and put it into a saucepan. For a single batch of this recipe, you want 2 cups of prepared peaches and 2 cups of prepared tomatoes. In the recipe, it actually says that 2 cups of prepared peaches is around 6 peaches, which is why I ended up prepping 12 for my double batch here. This ended up being way too many peaches. I'm not sure if these peaches were just larger in size than the ones I've used in the past, but 12 was too many. So just make sure you are preparing enough peaches for the recipe, which is just 2 cups. All right, so right now this contains our peaches, tomatoes, red onion, and red pepper. Now I'm gonna mince up some jalapenos to add to it. So you need about 2 tablespoons for a single batch or 4 tablespoons for a double batch. So I'll add those right now. So to this saucepan, I'm gonna add 1.5 cups of lime juice. If you're doing a single batch, you'll do 3/4 of a cup. Now I'm going to add 2 teaspoons of salt. And once again, if you're doing a single batch, you're gonna just do one. And then I'm gonna add 4 tablespoons of brown sugar. Single batch, you'll do 2. So now you want to heat this over medium-high heat until it starts to simmer, and then you want to simmer it for about 10 minutes. Basically until the peaches have softened a bit. So I'm just adding about 2 cups of cilantro. Okay, I think this is ready. I'm gonna start packing my jars. Making just a little bit of a mess here, but that's okay. I think I might have enough for one more jar. So I'm just gonna put one in here quickly to warm up while I get the rest of these done. So you want to leave about 1/2 inch of headspace on all your jars. So go through with a non-metal utensil, get out all your air bubbles, and then adjust your headspace as necessary. And then once again, you just want to make sure that your lids are just finger tight. it is getting hot in here, so these need to process for about 20 minutes. Check your altitude if you're at a higher elevation. Make sure that you are canning to the proper amount of time depending on how elevated you are. So these are going to go for about 20 minutes. Then I'm going to turn the stove off, take the lid off, let them sit in there for 5 minutes, and then put them next to these guys to cool. And I will check back with you in a few minutes. Okay, so I just took the salsa jars out of the canner. I have them all here. I don't know if you just heard that, but one of them just popped. So I'm gonna let these cool overnight, take the rings off, and then put them on my shelf downstairs. But I am done for the day. I am absolutely exhausted. So I will see you back here tomorrow and we'll make the pressure canned vegetable stock together. All right, it is the next day. Welcome back. So here are all the jars that we finished making yesterday. As you can see, I've removed the rings from all the jars. If you're new to canning, it is recommended that you remove the rings from all of your jars before you store them long term. This just helps prevent any false seals from happening. I've also gone through and I've tested all of my jars by just lifting them up by the top lid. And as long as they hold like this, your jars are properly sealed. It is recommended that you keep all of your jars in a cool, dark place, so basement is perfect. So I'm gonna move these downstairs today before we start our next project. And I also need to run out into the garden to grab some ingredients for our vegetable stock recipe that we'll be making today. So I think the only thing that I need out in the garden today is carrots, celery, and tomatoes. So let's go see what we have ready to harvest. Just a few giant carrots to add to our vegetable stock today. So my celery patch, it doesn't look great, but I am going to harvest some of these stalks to put into the soup as well. Okay, so I think I grabbed everything that I need from out in the garden. I picked tomatoes, carrots, and celery, so let's go back inside and get this stock started. Okay, so now that I have all my ingredients that I needed from outside, I'm gonna get all the ingredients that I need for this recipe prepped. For this recipe, you're going to need 1 pound of carrots, 6 stalks of celery. I have a few more than 6 here just because my celery stalks from the garden were quite small. You'll need 3 medium-sized onions, 2 peppers, 2 tomatoes, 2 turnips. You'll need 3 bay leaves, 3 cloves of garlic, 1 teaspoon of thyme, and 8 peppercorns. Unfortunately, I just realized that the pot that I was hoping to make my stock in today is not big enough to make the entire recipe. So what I'm gonna do is basically half the recipe, or make 2 halves of the recipe, and make half in my crock pot that I have here. So I'm making the full recipe, just putting half the ingredients in one pot, half the ingredients in the other. So I'll be using both of these pots to make my stock today. Not ideal, but sometimes you gotta work with what you have. So I just finished adding 3.5 liters to each of these pots, and as you can see, they are super full. This is not ideal whatsoever, but I've already started, so I'm just going to continue what I'm doing and hope for the best. But if you are making this at home, definitely get a really big soup pot to make this recipe. I didn't account for the fact that all the ingredients would also be taking up space within the pots, so I should have had this recipe and just done that, but I'm already this far, I might as well continue what I've started. So now that I have my pots full, I'm going to put them on high and get them boiling. And then once they started boiling, I'll reduce the heat and then I'll simmer them for 2 hours with the lid on. So these have been going now for about 3.5 hours. They were on the stove for 2 hours with the lid on, and then after 2 hours I took the lid off, and as you can see they've lost quite a bit of volume of liquid, which is good. It's concentrating all of those delicious flavors. So now that I have about half an hour before these are done, I'm gonna get my pressure canner all ready to go. I don't know how this always happens to me, but I seem to always make soup on the hottest days of the year. It is currently 28 degrees in mid-September here, and I'm outside making soup. Okay, I have 5 jars in here warming up. I am reheating my stock, which I just strained. So now I need to fill my jars with my stock. So that'll be the next step. So I'm gonna start taking these out now. And you want to fill these up into an inch. So you want an inch of headspace. And make sure to give the rims a nice wipe down. And always close your jars finger tight. Okay, so I filled my canner. I've turned it up a little bit so that it can start to vent, and I'm gonna vent it for 10 minutes. And it is starting to now, so I'm going to turn it down and just let it vent for the 10 minutes. So that was a long, hot day. I will say that this recipe isn't necessarily hard to do or hard to make, but it is time consuming. About 30 minutes of chopping and then 4 hours of letting it simmer on the stove, and then another, depending on where you are, 35-ish minutes for processing in your pressure canner. So a full day's work essentially, and I got 3 jars, which, you know, isn't ideal. I feel like next time I make this, if I do, I would definitely double the recipe so that I end up with at least 6, if not more than that, because canning 3 jars of anything never seems worth it, especially when it's a long day like this. I will say that the stock does taste very good, so that's good. Will I make this again? I'm on the fence. I'm gonna try making a dehydrated stock, or like a bouillon base essentially, with my vegetables, and see if I can dehydrate something that I then have to reconstitute in water, and see if I like that better. That to me seems like a quicker process, because I would just have to spend the time chopping everything, dehydrating it, and then blending it and dehydrating it depending on how I want to do it. So yeah, overall, the last couple days have been busy, but I'm happy that I tried a new recipe, and I'm happy that I restocked my pantry with 2 recipes that I know I really love. I hope you enjoyed this video today. If you do, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button, and I will see you next time. Have a great week in the garden and in the kitchen.